Morning. I'm gonna get us started because, as you already know, we're on a fairly tight schedule. We have 4 speakers today for the Understanding Reality TV panel, which is nice. It should give us time for them all to speak their part and give us some time for questions. I'm Mike Aronson. I'm from the University of Oregon. I'm pleased to be here. I'm the moderator and early film guy. So. I'm interested to hear what our speakers have to say today. So we'll hold questions till the end of all 4 papers. Our first speaker today is Jack Bratich from Rutgers University. His paper is entitled "From Tele-vision." I don't know how to do the dash.
Yeah,
to Tele-programming, reality, affect, and subjectivation. Subjectivation.
That sounds right.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you. All right. So I wanted to welcome everyone and thank Sen for putting this together, this panel, which has been a great chance to both visit Portland for the first time and revisit with friends as well. So and share some of this with you. So it's one of the conventions sometimes that happens in conferences that people say, well, my title has changed, right? Well, my title's the same, but my content has changed. There'll be no reality TV today. There'll be some reality programming, but no reality TV. And that's because, you know, history sometimes intervenes in our own writing, right? So when we submitted this, I was still thinking about reality television and trying to think about ways to move it out of the frame of television into everyday life. But then a couple of things happened. You know, well, I'd just been writing about the Arab Spring and social media, and then Occupy Wall Street occurred too. So I've been trying to think through these ideas, but using different kinds of assemblies of bodies around mediation. So some of the ideas are going to continue, but if you want to see the thing I did on reality TV, that was basically the abstract that I sent in. It's in edited collection called Flow TV. So these are some of the ideas that we're still going to transfer from the things I've been thinking about with reality TV to what you'll see next. So the notion of a program being both what Hay and Ouellette discuss as a kind of governmental apparatus when reality TV operates to organize and to produce subjectivity. It's a kind of governance and a conduct of conduct on the one level, right? This sort of that, and then the other side is what I'm interested in is a kind of Spinozan take on the art of organizing encounters, the encounters of bodies together. So I was trying to think of program in both those senses when it came to reality television, and around this notion of affective convergence, right? So there's a bit in Henry Jenkins' Convergence Culture where he talks about the convergence of brains. And I was like, oh, this is an interesting thing he doesn't really pick up on very much. So I tried to use this notion of the convergence of brains and bodies in reality experiments, reality television. So I'm going to continue to highlight affective convergence. And then the third thing, which is the important thing for me, is also the highlighting the moment of dissent and antagonism and divergence in this convergence culture as well. So I talked about all these things when it came to the genre of reality television, but I want to move from that to from the notion of the image, of the television as part of an image apparatus, to what Maurizio Lazzarato calls the technological dispositives of action at a distance. And he's looking at the emergence of things like newspapers and the telegraph and constructing a public mind. Right? And so I want to go back to some of the early mass communication studies that emerged out of a way of trying to understand persuasion, propaganda, psychological warfare, and get some of that and bring that back into ideas of tele-programming. So it involves actually revisiting some rather, marginalized now thought in cultural studies, which is somebody like Michel Desserteau, who, for all of the work on the practices in everyday life, also really focused on this thing called polemology, right? The study of warfare itself. So I want to bring back that notion of warfare in this idea of convergence culture, and specifically with the approaches taken to things like net wars and network-centric warfare. And within that, then, so here are just some theoretical, shout-outs. That's a mistake. Mediated public. publics, not meditated publics, although that's probably a good slip there. Meditated publics and novopolitics that Lazzarato talks about, right? So a lot of Foucault's work is on, for instance, biopolitics, but Lazzarato is really interested in this notion of a kind of public mind or even a kind of spiritual transmission, right, that composes a public, right? And really, and Tiziana Terranova, in her really amazing article, Future Public, takes Lazzarato and talks about Said and covering Islam as one of these ways of creating future publics around something that she takes from Ryan Masumi called the affective fact. So these are just quick shorthand things that I want to say, where I'm sort of coming from. But this is why, for me, what I'm going to be talking about is less about reality television as much as something like Egypt around this issue of social media and the production of telepublics. Now, for the most part, the dominant focus when it came to things like understanding social media or understanding Facebook and the Arab Spring or Facebook and Egypt, the Tahrir Square, was focused on the power of these social network sites to mobilize people, right? How important was it that these platforms were there to mobilize people on the streets? So this debate, was it a Facebook revolution? And then the counter argument that no, this is not a social media fueled revolution. These were simply tools. And so I don't want to do either of those. Instead, I'm less interested in actually the use of social media in Egypt or by Egyptians, and more about the construction of a telepublic, a transnational telepublic that was designed to sort of have an opinion, to create a kind of public opinion around Egypt through a series of both social media and also, as we'll see, a kind of interesting old media version, which is not be considered Al Jazeera. So what I'm interested in, one of the things that I've been working on the last couple of years is this State Department funded organization called the Alliance of Youth Movements, and they've had a number of summits since 2008 where they brought together youth groups from around the world who were interested in creating oppositional forces, and then some of these major media companies, from old media to new media, right? They were coming together and they were basically having these workshops and skill shares to train young people on how to use social media effectively to overthrow their repressive regimes, right? And there's some amazing videos about these how-to videos, like how to start a revolution through Facebook. And I don't have time to show them, but it's very clunky, but at the same time, they've had a couple of years for this stuff to sort of permeate and move around and take hold. So this is called public diplomacy 2.0, right? This is what James Glassman, the Undersecretary of the Department of State, calls this, right? So keeping that in mind, public. So here's, sorry for the excessive verbiage on this, but it's a long quote, and I want to make sure we got it up there. So I'm trying to think of this production of a mediated public through this idea from the Tofflers, right? Who in this Rand collection talked about a new model of the role of media in warfare, right? So it's a model that they're trying to change the terms of how essentially propaganda works. It's a model whereby some parts of the media system no longer function as passive outlets for propaganda, but instead become active and equal members of a network of alliance or deep coalition that connects heterogeneous partners bound by a temporary commitment to a specific project of warfare, right? So again, trying to figure out what is the role of these kinds of deep coalitions, these kinds of networked, temporary mobilizations of public opinion, right, as a way of thinking about polemology in contemporary media culture. So what I want to focus on then is this particular moment, right, where someone, during the events at Tahrir Square, those 18 days or so, right, the way that people, primarily in the West, primarily in the US, had a kind of socially mediated gaze, which, interestingly enough, depended on the absence of television, right? Al Jazeera, without a televisual presence in the kind of, in the sense of a broadcast or a cable presence in the US, could be accessed online, right? So you had, maybe have you experienced this? I certainly did, and had a number of friends, right? So it's kind of anecdotal, right? This moment where they're watching Al Jazeera and updating something, either on Facebook or Twitter at the same time, right, on the same screen. So I want to figure out what, partially what's going on in that moment as the kind of organization of a telepublic through this kind of gaze, right? Because what struck me as odd during this time was after the party, right? After the overthrow of Mubarak, there was a fascinating thing. Oh, I don't have that slide, right? So this is what's happening in Tahrir Square that following weekend, right? The military comes in, starts sweeping people out. People want to stay around, so they said, hey, you know, Mubarak's gone, that's great, that's a great first step, but we're not here just for that. We're here to create, you know, a kind of a real democracy. Well, you know, the military comes in and starts sweeping them out. However, if you went on Al Jazeera that day, or much less something like CNN or MSNBC, what you found, I mean, I'm like, oh, I want to see, I heard about this, I'm like, I want to see what's going on, a live feed from Tahrir Square of this. No such luck, right? There was some repeat of this very sort of pleasant scene in the Philippines where somebody's talking about Philippine tourism, right, at this moment. So I'm like, okay, well, what is going on when this switch off happens, right? That suddenly now our gaze moves from this constant updating, passing, you know, our opinions, you know, and as well as our outrage about what's happening and our enthusiasm for it. Suddenly, that's supposed to be switched off, where we're not supposed to, you know, time to move on, right? Nothing to see here anymore. The project is over. Mubarak is gone. So another dimension of this is why I'm going to focus on the kind of the user, and that is the importance of in any revolutionary situation of the spectator, right? So Michel Foucault, you know, has a few essays on Immanuel Kant. They're not, you know, sort of in the canon. People don't read them that much, but a couple of them on what is enlightenment and what is revolution. And so Foucault looks to Kant and says, you know, Kant's onto something when he talks about enlightenment revolutions and modern revolutions. It's not the people who are actively involved that matter as much. I mean, because those are always going to be a few people. But what matters mostly are the spectators, right? And what the spectators do in the ways they see, right, the transformations that are happening through whatever the activists are doing, right? So any revolution, right, is the spectators get dragged along by the show, and he says what's crucial is that those spectators have a kind of sympathy which borders on enthusiasm, right? So I'm interested in that kind of affective moment of the spectator, who now is no longer, right, one that just it's not organized by image and visuality, right? It's not television now, right? It's participation. It's now the gaze where you're watching, but then you're also passing, right? You are transferring something, you're linking, you're updating, right? You're sending information out. So this is the moment of the moving from seeing to participating. So I want to, you know, so I'm trying to look at the moment where the individual is a kind of affective transfer point in these assemblages, right, that are organized phenomenologically to mobilize public opinion now. And so I go back, you know, what I want to eventually do is go back to the work of people like Harold Lasswell and Walter Lippmann and the ways they were thinking about constructing publics. At the same moment, you know, that Lazzarato is also looking at the rise of these teletechnologies, these telepublics, and the ways that the public then was, you know, for somebody like Lippmann, was also very much a spectator who was supposed to basically say yes or no, identify with heroes, you know, voice their opposition against villains, but the story was given to them, right? So now, you know, I think we have a similar kind of story being told in Egypt, right? There are the sort of, you know, the bad last pharaoh, Mubarak, and these sort of swelling democratic crowds, right? And so that binary that was you know, produced and promulgated suddenly became, you know, the ways that we were asked to identify. And then when that's mine that tells me I have a couple minutes, 2 minutes. So thanks. I always have to have backup reminders too. So what now is the role of this online transmission of enthusiasm, right, as a part of any revolutionary moment? So what I end up looking at, and some of this I've written about this in a short piece called Khyber Revolts, and going back to what Tiziana Terranova was talking about with future publics, right, that enthusiasm meets a particular kind of transmission, which is the affective fact. And she takes this quote from Brian Masumi It's a widespread sensation of immediacy and familiarity with distant events, facts, and peoples that does not correspond to any substantial knowledge, right? So essentially, mobilize opinion through affect without really necessarily knowing what's happening on the ground, right? And then that can easily be switched off when necessary. So what was the affective fact of Egypt's revolt? Thankfully, I didn't have to come up with it. CNN, this tagline with this fellow, it's a transmission of hope, right? And it was a particular kind of hope. I love this screen grab because, you know, the ostensible conversation is about about Egypt, but then they're running this line at the bottom, social media fueling Libyan unrest, and up there is also a picture of Beijing, where the sort of next hope is that this wave is going to take place, right? So what is it about these sort of affects of outrage and hope that are now being mobilized to organize transnational publics, right? Okay, so how do I say this, right? So the social media spectators, kind of said that already. So the public then is this, going back then to the deep coalition, this temporary alliance, the public becomes this sort of affective extension or carrier for the work that needs to be done, right? So now we are the hosts and the and the spreaders of this affective contagion around both hope and support. But then, you know, when are we asked to stop that, right? So going back to the very first slide about these two components, the governing of subjects, right? Governing subjectivity, right, which is what I've basically been talking about so far. That first part of the dispositif that organizes a public for particular wartime ends. However, the second part, right, the Spinozan part would say, well, it's not enough to talk about the control and the organization of those subjects. In fact, there's something else that happens when you try to organize encounters through this transnational affectivity and what I'm calling affective convergence, and that is, this is the last slide now, is this sort of spillover that cannot be contained, right? So once that affective stimulation is activated, how easily can it be deactivated? So what I want to end with is this moment of antagonism and possible reprogramming that I think we've seen with something like Occupy Wall Street, which, I mean, there's a number of dimensions that I would want to talk about, like the revival of culture jamming in this new mode, which, you know, somebody like Jenkins says, you know, that's all we're done with. We're done with culture jamming. The fans have won, but now, you know, there's a way that it's been revived in terms of actual street action, and so the way that Occupy Wall Street both invokes Tahrir Square, but now forces these sort of the temporary deep coalitions to have to respond to Occupy Wall Street differently than they responded to Egypt. So, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, from the Arab Spring to the Jersey Shore. Lovely. Our next speaker is Chelsea Bullock from the University of Oregon, and her talk today is Problematic Pleasures and Affective Moments, Theorizing Jersey Shore. Give her a second to set up here.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Jack. So this paper is actually no longer titled that because when Bish graciously asked me to participate on this panel last summer sometime, this was still very much, it's a work that I have been keeping close to my heart since then, so it has thusly evolved a lot. And originally what I thought that I was going to be doing was sort of performing a reading of Jersey Shore through an affective lens, right? But that turned out to be, at least from the start, really unwieldy. Like I needed to back up and sort of be more focused in my analysis before I could start applying affect in ways that would be productive. So today what I'm doing is sort of more of a traditional gender reading of Jersey Shore and talking about some of those issues and then hopefully evolving and involving affect later down the road. So the new title, The Guidos on TV That Be Trying Too Hard, The Feminization of Celebrity Labor in Jersey Shore. And before I even started, I wanted to just go ahead and sort of tell you what I am arguing in this paper, which is two parts, right? So the big part is I'm arguing that there's a subgenre of reality TV that I'm calling intimate reality TV, right? And then within that, I'm saying Jersey Shore qualifies as intimate reality TV despite its overt celebrations of masculinity because it makes visible the work of being a celebrity. So I'm saying intimate reality TV is feminized, and that Jersey Shore is part of that, even though it has this wild, blatant celebration of masculinity because of the ways in which it makes visible celebrity labor. Okay? Up to this point, much of the scholarship that has dominated the field of reality television has not accounted for the current diffusion of programming. As I will argue in my dissertation, there are 5 clear subgenres of reality TV: competitive, crime, interventionist, workplace, and the 5th is intimate, which I will discuss today. Examples of intimate reality TV include Jersey Shore, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Big Rich Texas, and the Real Housewives franchise. Jersey Shore sort of seems like a which one doesn't belong in that list of programs, and for good reason. The show seems to privilege masculinity in a way that the others do not, which I'll say more about in a minute. The hallmarks of intimate reality television include a featuring of the same cast for multiple seasons, manipulation and mining of the cast members' personal lives for narrative purposes, and the production of an intimate environment on and through the show. These shows center on a variety of interpersonal relationships: familial, domestic, friendly, there's the range. And I position this particular subgenre as inheriting soap opera's cultural feminization, along with its consequential devaluing, in opposition to shows that are operating within the heritage of documentary. So one of those subgenres that I mentioned was workplace, and I would position workplace television as an inheritor to documentary traditions, whereas intimate reality television sort of stems from more soap opera conventions. This feminization and devaluing of intimate reality television is visible in branding, the show's settings, edits and framing, storylines and character development, and extra-textual celebrity culture publications and presence, such as fashion and gossip magazines, the Sidebar live chat on MTV.com where you can go watch Jersey Shore for free online after it airs, stuff like that. Much like soap operas, this feminization functions to code programs like Jersey Shore as trash or guilty pleasures, and therefore not worthy of serious analysis. Feminized labor, as depicted in intimate reality programming, is often the work of being a celebrity and actively engaging with celebrity and fan cultures. Masculinized labor, however, is most clearly depicted in the subgenre of workplace reality programming. Shows like Big Shrimpin', Pawn Stars, Storage Wars, Deadliest Catch. That kind of masculine labor is usually physical, menial, low-wage work. In this framework, women, or those who are willing to take on the feminized mantle of celebrity labor, such as I'm going to show you Pauly D and Vinny of Jersey Shore are frequently more upwardly mobile than their male counterparts who are working in the real-world margins. However, the divergent historical antecedents and all of those conventions that are inherited along with them of each type of programming, soap operas and documentary respectively, are often more significant than individual characters in determining the show's positioning in popular discourse and in hierarchies of quality or value. One way of making this distinction clear is to consider what shows within these 5 subgenres are popularly identified as guilty pleasure entertainment, right? So thinking about the contrast between shows that involve the Kardashians and shows like Deadliest Catch or X-Men or Gold Rush. As I've already mentioned, Jersey Shore is a unique example among what I identify as intimate reality programming. The male characters of Jersey Shore willingly take on the feminized mantle of celebrity work, as is required of them to have a significant role within the subgenre. I want to isolate a moment from season 4 that crystallizes both a performance of hypermasculinity, but also makes visible the feminized work of being a celebrity that the male characters are required to do. In this scene, Pauly D and Vinny play act as ultimate Guidos in their Florence, Italy equivalent to the Shore House. They dress each other up in Guido costumes, affect extra deep masculine voices, and create a catchphrase that mimics the show's iconic lifestyle motto, GTL, or Gym Tan Laundry. Also important to note, though I can't elaborate here, is the way in which the bromance between Pauly and Vinny disrupts the heterosexual hypermasculinity of the performance. Their meta Guido characters behave in even more openly affectionate ways than Pauly and Vinny normally do, making plain the intimate relational nature of celebrity work, which is exaggerated here, as they perform meta Jersey Shore celebrity, right? Okay, let's see if we can get this to work.
Well, he's not with his new hairstyle. It's totally banging.
Yo, I look like the Guidos on TV that be trying too hard. My new roommate, Joey D.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah!
Joey D, taking over Italy. Paulie D's a clown. Yeah. Buddy.
Joey, dress me like a Guido.
You gotta put a track jacket on.
We are dressing like ultimate Guidos right now. And no one knows more about Guido tool bags than us.
Yeah, use a headband. Yup, you're like a Guido, bro.
The boys keep talking about these tracksuit costumes, and I'm just like, it's not a costume.
Wait, hold on.
That's their normal clothes.
You need chapstick, bro?
Yo, do I got enough chapstick on, Louie?
Dude, do I have enough chapstick on, Tony?
You need a lot of chapstick, bro.
Louie, you're gonna get all the girls. I'm gonna fist bump till my arm falls off. Fist bump like this, Louie. Yo, you ain't Guido overload, bro. Oh, my bad, my bad. Oh, hit me in the eye, Louie. How many times I gonna tell you? Don't fist bump next to my eye. FPC, it's fist bump, push-up, testing. Fist up, push-up, testing. Fist up, push-up, testing.
All we need is FPC. Fist pump, push-up, chapstick.
Fist up, push-up, testing. Fist bump, push-up, testing.
FPC's a way of life. I'm a Guido for life.
What are you talking about, Tony?
You were like every guy ever dated. I swear to God.
Okay, so there's a lot going on in that clip, but particularly what I wanted to emphasize is the fact that Polly and Vinny, or Louie and Tony, right, aren't just performing a specific kind of gendered ethnic identity, which they're calling Guido-ness, right? They're performing a reflexive meta-critique of their own celebrity identities. They're reveling in their own artifice that's happening there. This scene would not have been as meaningful, if possible at all, in early seasons of the show. Their play acting as ultimate Guidos calls upon accumulations of meaning and trades on their well-established celebrity as self-proclaimed Guidos. That's happened over the course of, this is in the 4th season. So, in other words, this scene isn't about Polly and Vinny performing Guido-ness because that's what the entire show ostensibly is. Instead, this makes visible the work of being a celebrity who also happens to identify as a Guido. The characters are removed to Florence partially as a direct result of this celebrity, right? The producers couldn't have them wandering around Seaside, New Jersey anymore because it was no longer their everyday lives. They have fans following them, which is featured in the current season, but in season 4 they were still kind of pretending that they lived outside of that construction. To further explain this celebrity work, I'm going to return to my genre-based framework. Masculinized workplace programming, again, big shrimping, Storage Wars, features male or masculine characters performing occupational, often menial labor. Feminized intimate reality television features primarily female and feminized characters who frequently have successful careers that are not directly related to the shows, thinking about Real Housewives in particular. But those females are positioned on camera as first and foremost performing the work of celebrity. That is their primary labor on those shows, in opposition to the examples of masculine labor that we see on the workplace shows. Think about the difference between Rick Harrison of Pawn Stars or Captain Phil Harris from Deadliest Catch and Nene Leakes from Real Housewives of Atlanta and Snooki, right? And the ways in which their labor is figured differently and along gendered lines. In Jersey Shore, the male characters are feminized in many ways, like thinking about their obsession with their appearance, the grooming activities that have a prominent place on the show, and the bro code that they refer to. But the particular feminization that's happening in that clip comes through the way that the work of being a celebrity is rendered transparent. Even in a televisual space such as Jersey Shore, where masculinity is consistently performed in exaggerated and stereotypical ways, what's happening is still feminized TV due to the conventions of soap opera that are signaled, and the history that is called upon, the association of celebrity culture with female consumers, despite the fact that the most recent data shows that Jersey Shore is almost equally divided between male and female viewers, and an emphasis on excessive frivolities and interpersonal relationships, right, which is like the bread and butter of Jersey Shore. The rhetoric of guilty pleasure that is so often applied to Jersey Shore and its intimate reality television counterparts denies the significance of the complex and contradictory cultural negotiations that are happening through the show, such as the way the show continually emphasizes and rewards masculinity, yet adheres to the terms of engagement that are specific to feminized television. That's all I got. Thank you.
You want to go from here? Our next speaker is John Crane from the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And his paper is The Alexis Krystle Nexus, Gender Performance in Reality TV.
It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank my old friend Vish for organizing this panel. I've known Vish in a long time. It's been a great pleasure to be here. I was going to begin with a brief clip, but even if you've never watched Dynasty, you'll be able to recall the images that I'm going to talk about. The clip I was going to show you, and you can find various versions on YouTube and all sorts of blogger sites, was a compilation of the greatest hits from Dynasty, where Krystle and Alexis, the binary opposites, ash blonde, Alexis and Krystle would wrestle and fight in every episode, and it's the moments that fans would look forward to. And now you can find them all over the internet. And what I want to talk about today is how those clips shape our understanding of the form of Dynasty. And a little bit of background for those of you who don't quite recall how big Dynasty was. It ran from 1981 until 1987, a two-part farewell miniseries. Dynasty, the reunion aired in 1991. There was a subsequent fictional TV movie, Dynasty, The Making of a Guilty Pleasure, which aired in 2005. Ironically, it was disowned by the principals for a lack of historical accuracy. And Dynasty Reunion, Catfights, and Caviar ran in 2006. Catfights and Caviar featured clips and chat with the principals reflecting on the show, and it's now essentially a model for what happens after the run of lots of reality shows where the cast reconvenes for a post-mortem and they revisit and reopen old wounds. The writers and producers, Richard and Esther Shapiro, are now shopping around a prequel, and Joan Collins says she's ready to star in it. Now, if you'd seen the clip, and you do know all the images, after watching the clip, you wouldn't be wrong to wonder if you were watching a highlight reel from Housewives Amok in Orange County, Beverly Hills, or DC. And I want to make the argument that Dynasty functions as the primal scene for much of the gendered construction of reality programming featuring women. Now, when we talk about the primal scene, lots of the early psychoanalysts talked about it and then had their own take on it. Freud, when he described and theorized the primal scene, vacillated between whether it was a real moment of violent confrontation or a fantastic recollection of what never was, which is a perfect way to talk about reality TV. And what happens in the primal scene, as with much gendered reality programming, Jersey Shore, for instance, is a fusion of sex and violence. And for the child who's watching the primal scene, as well as for the viewer who's watching reality television, there's no real clear delineation between the two. You just have a sense of arousal in this mixture of, in relationship to this mixture of sex and violence. And that's not just true for reality programming, it's also true for football and Spartacus and lots of things that occupy our time. Other psychoanalysts, including followers of Melanie Klein, argued that the primal scene is really what, and again this is a way to think about television, it's a projection of the child's own conflated sexual and violent urges, a way of thinking of the primal scene from the perspective of the viewer. And in making this argument, I don't want to say that Dynasty is the absolute origin. There's too many television historians who will be able to name all sorts of iterations prior to Dynasty until you keep going back to the real Cro-Magnon housewives of southern France painted on the cave walls of Wasko. But rather, Dynasty perfectly embodies what's necessary and sufficient in reality programming to be fascinating. And in the clip, and again, you can find them on all sorts of fan sites and on YouTube, it's not just Dynasty that has these kinds of greatest hits, but all the housewives shows have them, Mob Wives have them, Bad Girls Club has them, Charm School has them, The Bachelor, Love and Hip Hop, The Surreal Life, Basketball Wives, Baseball Wives, Jersey Shore, and on and on and on. I'd run out of my time here if I listed all of them. The compilations are all fan-produced, and they're generally accompanied by voluminous comments from fans about whether or not all the best moments have been captured, and oh, you forgot this fight, as well as recollections of how delicious these moments of explosive conflict were. And in sum, what you have is the collective production both in the reality shows and the discourse and images on YouTube, explaining the attraction of repeated viewing across years of programming. And the highlights, one of the ways to think about highlights, I want to borrow from Linda Williams, who's one of the film scholars responsible for bringing low genres into cinema studies. And when Williams talks about these low genres, including the pornographic, the melodramatic, women's pictures, what they all have in common is excess. Again, what's true of lots of reality programming as well. And in genres of excess, gendered reality programming is surely in excess of genre, as it's been variously maligned for being pornographic, displaying outside emotions, as well as attracting large female audiences, which are always suspect. Think, for instance, of what people say about the audiences for all the various iterations of Twilight, which has this just huge female audience. I happened to go to the movie theater early when the Twilight films opened, and I came out and there was just, I thought the revolution had started, because there were just all these women, just hundreds, thousands of women at the theater. And in these genres of excess, what's notable is how much the scene matters, the number, as Williams calls it, matters, and that what doesn't matter is narrative continuity, character development, any writerly nicety. What matters is the hit or the number. And if you think about all the greatest hits from reality programming, and even if you don't watch these shows, you're likely to be able to recall these moments. Think of Teresa from Real Housewives of New Jersey overturning the dinner table in a scene, Sammy versus JWoww, and there were multiple fights on Jersey Shore, Tammy versus Mika, and I think you mentioned most of these people, their fight on Basketball Wives. It's very similar to what you might see on SportsCenter, except it's reality programming, or the NFL channel that just runs highlights from games, so you don't even have to watch all the boring moments. So that in these Primal Scene moments, they actually remind me of how when you and I were young and not lettered and not PhD critics, how we would talk about our favorite shows, and we generally wouldn't talk about the narrative and the story. What we talk about is, do you remember when this happened? And again, that's typically the way in which we frame our discussions of reality programming. And I would argue that in reducing reality to the moment, to the bit, it's a kind of degree zero for television. There's repeating the highlight moments. For a genre which has already stripped the broadcast of any narrative complexity, symbolism, character development, experimented form, imaginative extension, play with convention, reality TV really is a very pure, clean genre. But of course, there's a problem with this form, and it's not just the problem that you might see discussed, say, in the recent documentary Misrepresentation, which is more concerned with the ideas that are contained in the program as opposed to the problem with form. And what I'd argue is that what might be troubling about this new degree zero of television is not so much the content, but rather the form, the reduction of reality to these moments on endless screens. And I was even thinking about our relationship to and our ability to criticize these moments and these highlights. And what we do here, this is the first conference, for instance, that I ever had to come in and sign a waiver. Last time I had to sign a waiver was when I went bungee jumping on my honeymoon. And so that we're here to produce our own clips and our own moments that can compete with this frenzy of reality, which is, because you mentioned a lot of the shows, all the shows that feature working class men on the losing side of history, unless they happen to be swamp people, people with dirty jobs, truckers on ice roads, turtle men, or women who are battling amongst themselves in endless gendered parodies of conflict. And the question I would leave you with, and I don't know what the answer is as reality programming and continues to spread to, it's hard to imagine an area which is outside the possibility of producing these hits and these clips in this particular form. As reality programming replicates like a virus and constitutes one of our shared commons, what's the counter-programming? Jack, you kind of pointed to it with your talk. And in this battle between the screens and what happens in the square, as opposed to all the screens where what we see happening in Jersey Shore. Right, how does that battle play out? How do we address the kind of infinite reach of degree zero reality programming? And to return to the place where I started, I began with the show, even when it first aired, right, was presented with a wink and a nudge. Right, Dynasty was never serious, yet 3 decades later, which is, as you all know, an eternity, right, an epoch in TV time, right, it remains the model for implosive transmediated performance of the unscripted real in shows that can only be nominated with an oxymoron, reality programming. So, thank you.
Thanks, John. Last, but never least, Bish Sen from the University of Oregon is going to be speaking on reality television and the question of global form. We good?
Computers, just having a moment.
Okay.
It'll get
We'll all have a moment.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting an apology, my paper title hasn't changed. Well, we talked briefly about what I'm going to argue. So, take a slightly different type. I have to say, I love that thing about reality. John's point about reality TV being like Comet or Ajax, pure and clean, sparkling. Because I'm kind of making a similar argument, but I'm approaching reality TV from a kind of a globalization perspective. And I'll give you my argument in a sort of, just 3-sentence form. One, proposition number one, I'm suggesting that reality television formats are global objects, kind of like airports. You can't tell, wherever you go, there's this airport, and where is it from? It's global. And my argument is that reality TV formats are global objects, new kind of object. Oh, there you go. Well, the rest is, let's keep it in suspension. My point of departure is India, just because I just got back from India. And there's this show called Big Boss, which is, you probably already have figured out, it's a variation, well, maybe not, it's a variation of the Big Brother format. And it's a huge hit in India. The lady there, somebody recognize her? Yeah, took part, came in, wore a sari, for a short while lived in the house and then left. Pamela Anderson. The guy there, Salman Khan, is one of Bollywood's leading actors, and he's a host on season 4 and season 5. And that's just a little. So, reality TV came into India and it's huge already. The 4th season of Big Boss, which now had a 5th season, had a TVR of 6.7. I have to confess, the Indian rating system is, oh, Indians are nerds, right? It's highly mathematical completely, above my head. GRP, this, that, and I lose it. But anyway, it had a very high rating, in plain English. Superstars like Amitabh Bachchan, Sanjay Dutt, Salman Khan hosted the show, and this is really encouraging for those who love reality TV like me. 12 to 18-year-olds say, we want our TV. So there's hope for Indians. Oh, time elapsed. So I guess that was the starting point. But I think you could start with Malaysia, wherever you'd find the same thing. The incredible explosion of reality TV formats. It then becomes a nice launching pad for meditating on the relationship between globalization and reality TV. And so that survival, that sign, I don't know what it means, I just pulled it off. The arrow, something to that. I think that box could be a black box, meaning we don't fully know or something. Let's see if we can figure it out. This is, I call this section 1. I mean, it's a short thing. Not ambitious like section 1. Section 1 is the real as global, and that's what I just claimed. And this is my conclusion, and I'll try to establish it. But what I'm claiming is that reality TV's mode of production, as well as what I just decided to call mode of constitution, both enable it to become a global object like an airport. And so I want to amplify on that for the next 2 or 3 slides. This is list, Indian, original, American. So I'm not going to read out all of them, but Big Boss came into India in 2006, the original version from Netherlands, as you know, 1999, American version 2000, or you take Khatro Ka Khiladi 2008, hold on, just the date there, Fear Factor 2001, sorry about that. MasterChef 2010, Sach Ke Samana 2009. I don't exactly remember this, but I have 3 observations about this list. The first thing is the rapidity of circulation. Pop Idol was invented or whatever, created in England in 2001. It took 3 years before the Indian equivalent, Indian Idol, started airing and became a smash hit. And what does this point to is a change in the world order, clearly. Because for those of you familiar with post-colonial theory, one of the structuring concepts was the lateness of post-colonial time. There's this gap between what happens in the center and the periphery. So if you read all the literature starting from the 1950s, things happen at the center and then somehow they get implemented, but there's this eternal lag, so there's always a catch-up to the post-colonial condition. And I think we would all agree that that phase of world history is over. You go anywhere, you find everything. Wherever you go, you find iPads. They're not in Eastern Oregon. I remember you coming back and saying, he went to Eastern Oregon and said, how many of you have iPads? And some people hadn't even heard something. But certainly in India, everybody seemed to have iPads. Everything is everywhere at the same time, simultaneously. So there's this instant circulation of products, formats, processes. BPO. Everybody knows what BPO is? Business process outsourcing, one of the biggest things in the world today. Where entire processes of tabulation, calculation, just outsourced to these huge software companies, many of them in India. So all your financial life, which is like your blood, is being processed in real time, maybe in Bangalore, maybe in Delhi. Your credit card, your this, your that, your monthly statement, everything, your medical records. So you are being worked on somewhere else in real time. And so there's this incredible, old thing from David Harvey, space-time compression, where everything's fused into one global, instantaneous whole. So that's my first observation. The second observation is that I gave you that list, but since then, all sorts of shows, and we all know how many shows, but we don't know. How many reality shows are there? I don't know. 200, 300, 500. The point is, it's profuse as a form. Why is it profuse? I think one suggestion, and I'm sure there are other explanations, that it continuously clones itself with a difference. So you have one format, and you change a couple of rules, you have another format or another type of show. So in a way, it's a kind of, what should I call it? Asexual reproduction? I don't know. It can split itself and become another show. Makeover, the extreme makeover, this, that, New Jersey. Continuously cloning with a difference. So it has a certain, at a deep structural level, or it has a certain way of reproduction which enables it to multiply. So speed, multiplication. The third observation is more political. People watching Big Boss in India don't know, and I don't give a damn, that it was created in 1999 in the Netherlands. Do you? Do you give a 4-letter word? I don't. So I think that, those guys, the post-structuralists who was talking about the death of the author, and whenever old people like us went to grad school, they weren't quite right then, because I don't think the author died then. But certainly with reality TV, that prophecy has come true. I mean, we don't care, who created the format. It's just there. So conclusion, repeating. Speed of dissemination, the profusion of different formats, and the irrelevance of origin all point to a very specific mode of multinational production and distribution that creates a mobile cultural form that can proliferate worldwide. So the mode of production of reality TV enables it to become what I'm calling a global object. But there's something more than that. And along with the mode of production, there's, I'm calling it the mode of constitution. This really links up with what John was talking about. I like this formulation of the degree zero television. I've argued this before, again, that RTV has to be thought of the exact opposite of, say, quality television or traditional works of art. Where traditional works of art are rich in semantics, meaning, signification, symbols, and then lead to the employment of critics to study and explain these things. RTV is nothing. It's like 1 inch above ground, and kind of thing. And the reason, I think, why it's TV degree zero is that it's basically a syntactical object rather than a semantic object. By which I mean that what it enables is not, giving you this overdose of meaning, like chocolate gives you overdose of sweet or something. We don't lick RTV for meaning. We suck on it for grammar, I would argue. Because what does RTV do? It gives you certain rules, just like grammar, and you put words together with grammar to come up with utterances or outputs. And my point is that in RTV, you have certain outputs coming out from these grammars, whatever it's alliance, this, elimination, all these rules. So we could go on and debate this, but in the end, and I think last morning somebody said that sports is the ultimate reality TV. We could turn it around and say, reality TV is the ultimate plan. No, that doesn't work. But in a sense, the end is not dramatic closure, but a set of objective results. I don't want to push the analogy too far because it's not really sports. It's much more, it's deeper than sports. I always think of sports as just nostalgia for muscle. That's what I tell my undergrads. You don't need our muscles, so we like watch these tough big guys. So if you've agreed with me, then we can say, okay, so reality TV, because of its mode of production and because of its constitution as a syntactical object, can qualify as a prototype of a global aesthetic object, or just a global object. So if that is granted, well then, what's its effect? What is, if this sort of object proliferates around the world, what is its effect? And there are 3 possible answers, well at least 2, and then I'm going to humbly suggest a 3rd alternative. So the first one is that old one. From America, from UK, from Netherlands, this vile stuff is flowing and colonizing the rest of the world. And so globalization at the level of culture is the colonization of local media systems, pushing out local programming or native programming, whatever it is. And so the reality of globalization is both homogeneity, it's the same, Western cultural / financial models, and asymmetry in the sense it's a one-way flow. And of course, nobody believes in this anymore. So what? It's no, I mean, in a manner of speaking, nobody does, because we're all cultural studies / cultural globalists now. And the counter-argument, as early as 1999, with Tomlinson and Arjuna Mudarai's seminal piece, I forget the year at this juncture, but somebody can look it up, basically argued that no, it's not one way, the multiple flows. It's not a kind of uniform effect, but there's all this resistance, subversion, localization. And this is a recent sort of articulation of that same argument, saying that rather than positioning, new work suggests that implementation is specific, contingent, and unpredictable. I think Graham Turner was making the same argument yesterday. That so, okay, you have this format, maybe some evil people designed it, you plant it in local conditions, and things change, and I guess Fisk made this kind of argument about popular culture before some of you were born. And is there proof of this? Yes, there is. So, many faces of Big Brother. The British series, people took off their clothes. In Holland, they took off their clothes and did more. Americans, you guys, you're puritanical, you do nothing. Brazil, they in trying to summarize, what happened last night's show, they infused it with the language of soap and created this hybrid language, which then became on its own a big hit for Global. So, Holland did it differently, of course, and because they started. America does it differently. Brazil does it differently. Middle East, the show started, and right away there were protests, and it was shut down. And so, people, there was a violent reaction to Big Brother. All this is in support of the cultural globalization thesis that formats may be kind of like universals, but when you implement them, things change. I'm running out of time, so the message is no globalization without localization. In India too, there are local impact of things. Bollywood stars come in. The obsession with Pakistan and India, so we continuously import people from Pakistan to show that we love them. Here's this cross-dressing actor from Pakistan who appeared in Big Boss. So I could end it here saying that, so it's a global object, but when you insert that global object in local conditions, things change radically. So if I skip this, 3 kind of objections, and this is kind of tentative, so I'm just going to leave it dangling. And this is not my argument, but people have argued that this thesis has a bias towards methodological naturalism, that you try to understand phenomena using national boundaries or cultural boundaries. And there's a kind of limitation to understanding the global. So that's objection 1. Objection 2 is mine. I always feel for the big guy, not the small guy. So I hate it when Goliath loses all the time. But it does in this model, right? Big bad universal from somewhere, but local conditions always change it, and David prevails over Goliath. And I'm kind of naturally suspicious when the little guy always wins. It's just me. And the third critique is, a model like this, can it explain why RTV works in these local, is it just the amendments to the format that make it appealing, or is it something essential to it? And so, in a sense, I'm going back to the cultural imperialist thing, but in a different way. I'm not a political economist. I'm going to argue that there's something in the form of this global object that makes it kind of travel and appeal. Using shame as a concept. So this is Donnie Brendon, who's a big boss 4, loud and obnoxious, and I don't know who this is with, someone. Equally shameless. So I can't treat it as long, but I'll just make my argument. So here's the point. All undergrads say, don't these people have shame? Why are they shameless? Well, we've talked about it. And my argument is that no, it's not that you have to be shameless. The reason is, what is shame? Shame, if you think about it, is what did I say? Shame, as anthropologists have pointed out, is the affect that both indicates and atones for an individual's deviance from societal norms. So shame is that affect which emerges in the gaze of the big other, the social field. You've done something wrong, whatever. Point number two, I'm arguing that the artificial society of RTV, okay, is a purely, the mass society is an arithmetic mass. It's just numbers. There is no sociology or no or history to that mass. I always, to me, the most sublime moment is in the Survivor when people arrive from nowhere and meet on the island. There's never a history. It denies history completely. And so without history, without sociology, you have a mass, but it's an arithmetic mass, not a real social mass. So in that mass, there is no one else to judge you. So there is no shame. Shame is impossible in this kind of artificial society. And so there's a lot of judging, but despite that, the surfeit of judgment evident in any reality show occludes the fact that despite the famous line from Survivor, the tribe can never speak. The tribe does not speak. Individuals vote. And so finally, my point is that in a way then, the very form of reality TV imposes a certain code of behavior in which shamelessness is actually a positive thing. It's productive of shamelessness. And here I wanted to link up with, even though Jack claimed he's not talking about reality TV, I'm claiming he did, because I've been thinking that Facebook and reality TV are not that far. One of the things obvious about Facebook is the shamelessness, right? Of continuous affirmation and shamelessness. And to me, both these emerge from that same thing of arithmetic mass, arithmetic societies or whatever. I'm trying to coin something sexy now. And so I guess I'm concluding by saying that this code, visible in the theater of reality television and still in the process of being written, may be the right place to discover the full import of what we term the global. Thank you.
So we've got 12 and a half minutes. I'm going to bring everyone up and all. Might be some. Yes, not at all. You in the back.
Professor Sen, one of your slides mentioned that you could allude reality shows to sports. And I can buy that for shows like Survivor and The Amazing Race, because in those series, the participants are actually competing to win something. But I don't quite see that analogy in shows like the Real Housewives franchise. So do you think those are more soap opera-like?
Yeah, I think that's why I myself pulled back. Even as I said it, certainly it borrowed from, resembles sport in things like elimination, But elimination in sports is very different from elimination in RTV. So even as I apologize, in fact, I'm going to delete that sentence. Because when you think of elimination, why it's so radically different, when you're eliminated in a reality TV show, you're extinct in a sense. Whereas in sport, you always come back the next season. I mean, because sports is so fundamentally sort of old society, as it were. Whereas to me, reality TV is this what I'm trying to call it, arithmetic society or something. That elimination actually means deletion from the game. That's it. Whereas when you're defeated, whatever, then you say, oh, still a mission. 2 centuries later, they'll still be playing. Things like that. So I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the resemblance is superficial. I was just trying to make the point that at the end, unlike in art, where you have sort of dramatic closure, you have sort of objective results or numbers and things like that. But other than that, I wouldn't push the analogy too far.
I just want to back up. I don't know if I would fully agree with that, because many of these celebrity stars ultimately come back.
Oh, yeah.
And are in actual competition shows, sort of like Battle of the Network Stars, which seems to take us to an area where,
There is that, but I guess I'm talking about the pure form of reality TV. but then we all get corrupted by a desire for history. I mean, I wish we could just abolish history, but we can't, and so we all succumb at some point. But I wish.
Yeah, just to follow up on your talk. So, what's the implication of the globalization of shamelessness?
Oh, that's well. The implication would be if your question is kind of referencing the political, I would say that we have to work out then, and maybe this is more in sort of Jack's area of thinking, work out a different notion of politics that follows from a different concept of the subject. I mean, I guess deep down I'm arguing that there is a new subject being born, and both in reality TV and in Facebook, that is kind of asocial in a very primal way, precedes the social almost. And now, what kind of political emerges from that is going to be, I think we have to work out a theory of the network where kind of, not selfish, but selfish is an old word, but the sort of self-sufficient agents, because in Facebook we're all self-sufficient. You can never diss somebody on Facebook, you know. We're all like just right. So how do we create a network between just right subjects and what politics? That's an enormous question. I mean, we can start thinking, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough.
I'll give one quick example of a real life one, because so I teach at Rutgers, right? And so last year or 2 years ago, the Rutgers Student Services Club, paid, I think, like 30 grand to have Snoopy be the key speaker for the year, right? And talk about shamelessness, right? What was amazing, and the shaming that happened afterwards. No student admitted to ever going to this, right? I was like, well, what do you think? Everybody's like, I can't believe the students did this. I said, well, who went? Like, nobody claims anybody went. I mean, I was kind of insulted that I wasn't asked to introduce her. I mean, I would have been like, you should at least have someone who studies reality TV introduce her. But there was a sense that, and I also feel like there was a kind of battalion gesture, like we don't care, like this is like, we should get serious people to come and speak to us, and they're like, no, we should bring Snooki in, and it's this expenditure without a sort of rational core to it. So again, but there's a way of collectivizing this question of shamelessness, because there are definitely a collective shameless group of subjects. Instead of like, yes, we're going to bring this shameless woman, and we shamelessly going to do this in a higher, education institution and make papers. And I thought it was very brilliant.
Just offer the opposite, because I think there are still moments of shame and links between shame and reality programming. For instance, the gym that I go to, the chain, co-sponsors The Biggest Loser, and all these gyms in this chain invite you to try out for The Biggest Loser. So every time I go to the gym and I see, enter The Biggest Loser, I'm afraid that one of the people there is going to ask me to join. I need to. What is it when your gym wants you to try out as The Biggest Loser? And so I started going more frequently, and hopefully that I would get small enough that they wouldn't. So I don't think that reality and shamelessness are necessarily.
Rosalind Gill has pointed out, right, that makeover shows depend on a kind of toxic shame against women, right? So women have to be felt. Have to feel shame in the makeover.
My question is for Bish, but Jack, it has a lot to do with your talk too. But Bish, your critique of the cultural fearless crowd seems to just be the Deleuzian critique of like, you can't take the effect of reality TV and assume it means cultural imperialism, in that sense that like the reality TV is syntactic and not semantic. So I guess if we're thinking about reality TV as structures in which meaning can be developed out of, and not the vehicles for the meaning itself, what does that mean for reality TV in terms of like constructing reality as opposed to reflecting it? And what are the kind of power boundaries of that?
That's a large question, but take the first part. The way I read the cultural imperialist argument is that the output is that anything local is obliterated, and you have a kind of a monolithic, structure, process, and artifact. put in its place. It's turned around by the cultural globalization thesis, saying that no, that inevitably the local, leaks in and changes the object. Now, the last part of your question was what does this lead to a construction of?
Right. Is this a construction? Is reality TV a construction of reality, or is it a reflection? Or yes.
I mean, I tend to think of it as, I talk about it as interventionist television, right? And not just shows that actually have intervention in the title, but it's essentially a way of intervening into the real to reorganize it, and then counter that. And I think, so my interest in something like cultural imperialism would actually be a kind of interventionism, and this is why I'm interested in things like the State Department's organization of youth revolt through social media. I mean, this is a kind of traditional state interventionist model that is now using cultural processes to do so. So I think that to me is the link too, is the intervention in reorganizing the real.
Latin American call it making sense of reality, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the forms of negotiation.
So I'm going to strike my privilege and ask a question. And this goes to Chelsea, although it's off of Bish's this concept of shame. Shame is gendered, right? It's feminized. I would argue, and the photos you put up as examples prove that out, right? So I'm interested. I mean, you pointed out Jersey Shore as a kind of exceptional in some ways in this genre, but in some ways it might actually be the kind of the ground zero. I mean, in that it's making visible that, but it's doing the same work. Is the feminized labor of celebrity through the hyper-masculine in Jersey Shore, which I don't watch because I like things that I don't have to like. Is that why? I mean, is that the pleasure? I mean, is that why that show is popular? Is that why that show works, in the sense? And then if that's the case, is it actually exceptional in that sense, or is it in fact working well?
Representative.
Yeah.
I have a quick answer. Wait for Chelsea's dissertation.
Yeah, I have been cautioned against trying to figure out why Jersey Shore works.
Yeah.
I'm trying. But I mean, I think that it does. I do think that speaks to some, to a cultural discussion that's happening and that resonates with viewers in a way that they can't even quite explain sometimes. But I'll figure it out later. Okay, but I'll report back to you. How about it?
Sorry, I'm afraid I'm going to pick on Bish again. I just wanted to pick up on something which you said about, well, you asked the question about who cares where a reality format comes from. Now, I'm going to put my hand up. I care where reality formats come from. And partially it's because I'm a reality TV geek, and so, that it interests me. Also, it's because, and it seems to be a common theme in questions I ask, but because I come from a small country, I come from New Zealand. New Zealand's actually relatively well known for producing reality TV formats and exporting them. The Dutch, New Zealand, there's a few small nations which produce a disproportionate number of formats. And I think that there's worth thinking about perhaps why certain nations do. I mean, the Pop Idol format originally kind of comes out of the pop stars, which originated in New Zealand in '99, and it was before reality TV formats were really understood, and so it wasn't tied down properly. It wasn't sold in the way that they are now sold, and so something Carl picked it up in a way he went. I'm not sure if I've really got a question here, but I wonder if you wanted to speak to the way that certain nations perhaps, I mean, Endemol obviously has been a dominant force as well, but the way that certain small nations might be making use of the ability to sell reality TV formats in a way to export television that hasn't been possible for most small nations to larger Western or Eastern markets.
Yeah, let me first give a sort of facetious or trivial answer to it, is that maybe New Zealand is to RTV what Scotland was to British imperialism. They were often the agents of that, But it's kind of funny, when I was writing this, at times I said, well, in that list, if we didn't have time, the conspicuous absence of so many of the artists is not USA, all through from the 50s, television in the US had become synonymous, right? And there's this moment of disjuncture when suddenly television is not just USA. And to be honest, that's where I've stopped. I mean, your question just is something I haven't, why these small countries, and I do give a very weak answer in the paper that I'm writing, where it's that these places are, and it's not a good answer, necessarily more global. USA is a very parochial country, we know that. It's the least global place on the world, for those of us who are not from the field. And so Holland or New Zealand or Singapore are almost like these global objects, or almost global countries, I think. So maybe that could be a possible way to think, but I haven't thought through this. But it's a terrific question, I think.
If I could just sort of follow up, because just while you were speaking, something came to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, just from having knowledge of New Zealand television production a little bit. There's the nature of the fact that reality television production is relatively cheap. And New Zealand doesn't produce a lot of drama or comedy because of the expense factor. And so, I just... Do you think that perhaps the cost of production,
well, of course, but also I think when you're a small country, you have to think global. Because a small country, necessarily a domestic market, is not going to sustain. So you have to think global from the word go. Whereas US or even India and China, you can be domestic, in a very deep way and prosper. So that could be the advantage of small countries. And I think, the Scotland example is actually a good one, because the Scottish became, sort of instruments of colonialism because there was nothing there in Scotland. And the army of engineers and educators went across the globe, as you probably know, Scottish, much more than the English themselves.
So one last, Jack actually has a question that we're actually basically out of time. So
I expect since John hasn't had a chance to ask or talk, I was going to ask him a question. But if somebody else has a question for John, okay.
I have a question.
No,
and you can talk to him after.
Bish has spoken a lot. So John, two things that came up for me was interesting about this. One is the class dimension of this. So you move from, which is also a tale of reality TV following this, right? So now it's a democratization of the cat fight. So what used to be the privileged elite that got the breeds that fight it out, now it's alley cats, right? So the class version of that. The other part is going back to the primal scene, right? And the notion of repetition compulsion that follows from that with the clips, right? The clip shows. So it's no longer just, oh, here's a burst here, you would keep seeing it, but people are organizing entire clips together as repetition compulsion and then sharing it with each other. I think that's one of the new things, right? Is the participatory dimension to the sharing of the primal scene. It's no longer an individual subject that encounters it, but now we share it, and other people say, "Oh, but you missed this primal scene."
That's the link on Facebook.
Exactly.
The creation of a day and the sharing of the clip.
The sharing of the clip, right on YouTube and such. So I don't know, or just class or more psychoanalysis, which I think.
And to go back to what Bish said, beyond the compression of class and gender into these, it's almost to an affective moment, as opposed to, and when you talk about thin text, as opposed to anything that you would think about, you simply just react to it.
Yeah,
you feel it.
Feel it, right? And pass it on, right?
Like a cold.
Yeah.